Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Andor episode 7 and 8. So I couldn't record my review last week for episode 7, had a sore throat, and then a bunch of other videos sort of piled up that I needed to do before that, so that's why these are getting grouped up. Now, I think it was a relatively okay week to do it because I actually didn't have too much to say about episode 7. In the grand scheme of things, I don't really think I do in general. It felt to me more like a transition episode rather than the first episode of like the next arc. It was more of a reaction to the big events from the last episode and then a little bit of setup for what we are doing next. I think there was a couple of scenes that I thought were very good, but overall it was probably, in my mind, the show's biggest example of it's probably taking things a little too slow. I don't mind that it's taking a generally slow pace, building everything up, in that's what people seem to like. It's working well, but that I think was taking it a little bit too far. So the standout scenes for me were probably Mon Mothma talking to Tay and just the whole kind of, okay, we're finally beginning to do something with Mon Mothma, who I think has been probably one of the slowest builds. I think like her and Karn definitely have felt like the least amount of sort of notable things accomplished using like actually quite a bit of screen time in the series up to now. But I like that scene where they got across, like she was kind of like, okay, how much can I talk about it? But then he actually almost gets across the idea that his politics are leaning in the way of rebellion before she even mentions that. She's going to bring him on board as the way to access her funds, which was the kind of main issue that she was encountering in the first place. I did like that before that they set up the idea that she was shocked hearing about the kind of attack on the garrison, the big event that is still kind of being reacted to in the coming episodes. I like that she's shocked about like this is violence from the rebellion for the first time. She thought they were just going to do this kind of networking thing and try and help things that way, but she's, I suppose, quickly coming to realize that this has to be what she's doing plus also effectively a war effort against the Empire as well. And she has to be kind of stronger in what she's doing going forward. So when she finally opens up a little bit more to Tay and talks about her kind of manipulations in a way, what she's learned from Palpatine to distract with things, to hide other things that she's doing, that was actually, I thought, quite well done. Similarly, when Andor went back to its mother, basically, and she is like amazed, like she loves what happened, this act of rebellion, the attack, and she's inspired by it. And Andor can't quite bring himself to say that, oh yeah, I was involved in that. And there's a few kind of glances throughout that scene that are quite good. But they use, I think, the flashback with the kind of father figure here, the actual Clem, quite well here, kind of showing the kind of almost like random situation that like he was just calming some people down and apparently just gets gunned down in the street and then gets hung up there. And how his mother basically talks about how she hasn't been able to go through the kind of center square in years because all she can picture is him hanging there. But after what she just heard about, she took a stroll straight through the middle and was happy the entire time. And I kind of like that idea that like she is this rebel and seeing the rebellion starting is actually inspiring her, while in the same episode Andor is basically like, oh yeah, I got the money and I want to get out. And he's trying to present the idea, we'll leave, we'll get away from this all, we won't have to deal with it again. And all the while sort of missing the point of like, you know, there'll be something that pops up. There's, with the Empire in charge, there's no just sort of hiding from it. And that's the thing. And it feels like almost you have to either fully commit to joining it or you have to fight against it. Otherwise, you are going to get like run over by it. That's kind of the approach the series has sort of been taking up to now, and I think that was the entire point of like the ending of episode 7, the almost random cut after all the scenes with Andor talking to people of like, he leaves, he's going to use his money to start a good life for himself, and we basically get that happening. But then he's just randomly out walking when a bunch of other people run past him, and because he's just looking around, kind of checking what's going on, he walks off in another direction, which inadvertently sort of makes him look a little bit suspicious, like he's running away himself. And there's no explaining it away, like he wasn't actually involved in any of this. He just gets caught by the Empire just trying to go to the shop, and ends up in prison, as we see in episode 8, of course. I did think it was a little over the top, the scene where he gets his punishment and they're like 6 months, and he's just being like, what's going on? And they're like, oh wait, 6 years. It was just for a show that's done subtlety quite well, I thought that was a little like unsubtle. I think the discussion of like the numbers in the prison in the following episode I thought was a bit better than just what happens here. But yeah, the basic idea is that Andor, in trying to escape, misses kind of the point, and like if he was actively fighting the rebellion, he wouldn't have gotten into this situation. And now that he's in prison and we see what he's gone through, I'm guessing this will be one of the things that pushes him to want to, whatever way he escapes, fight against the Empire, knowing that this is what happens to you when you get caught. And when you get caught and accused of effectively nothing, just standing there, that's the part of the problem overall. Deidre kind of gets herself into a good position. The Imperial Security Bureau scenes in episode 7 I thought were reasonably well done. We see that the guy just below Yularen actually gets on board with her plan, but notes, watch your back, basically, in all of this. So it's an interesting kind of situation with her, where it's a moment where you're kind of like, I'm glad you got that and didn't get like rule sharked out of it by the guy basically trying to kind of snitch on her. But it's also this weird situation where you're kind of rooting for the character who's coming the closest to actually hunting down and finding the rebels. So you have to kind of realize that's the kind of situation the entire time. We got Vel basically is tasked with finding Andor and basically taking him out. Luthen, the whole thing that they do with kind of Luthen here is just that he's committed to this, but Andor now being a sort of this thing out there that he has no control over because of what happened. It is seen as like, will Luthen be found because of Andor? Is basically the main question that's getting brought up in all of this. Which I guess takes us into episode 8. What I will say is that I think the stuff in the prison is probably some of the best stuff that Andor has done. It's the most invested I think I've been in a kind of plot in Andor so far. And I think a prison usually always kind of like focuses things, and that you get this kind of extreme organization here. You get the what characters will they escape with, won't they escape with. How perfect is the security here? What is the pathway out of this place? Because it seems at the end of this episode like, how do you even get out here? It doesn't even feel like you have anyone with particularly amazing skill sets. If you do manage to find a few issues with the security, that you actually get out. Whereas at least in a lot of other situations, you have like the main characters like a Jedi or something like that, and you trust that they'll get something done because they're extremely skillful. Now, I think there's a few little bits of setup here. Like Andor, I think noticing a few little bits of disorganization among the staff, like when he's being brought in and they kind of instruct him to do the whole hands behind the head thing. And they're waiting for a guy to arrive. And it's like, no, he'll be here. Pause, pause, pause. And then he arrives and it's just like, oh, I was busy doing this thing. So I'm guessing it's probably some sort of reveal that the reason everything is so sort of regimented is to make up for the fact that they probably don't have as many security officers there as they actually probably need if something were to happen. So because it's such a large prison, they can probably organize situations where if they cause an issue over here, it will take guards away from another location and it will allow for a relatively like easy escape. The other thing is, I think very clearly the whole idea of like they have to be barefoot the entire time because the floors are electric, and that's the way that they kind of control people. That they have to stay in their little rooms while the floor is electrified. And then I think they made heavy kind of focus on the guards wear these giant shoes that are basically, I suppose, you know, they're immune to electricity or whatever way I'm trying to phrase that. So I'm guessing they'll find some way to get a couple of pairs of them, and that will allow them to do quite a bit. Because I think they're relying a lot on those electrified floors to do quite a bit. There was that moment where they're all queuing up. I think it's just ahead of sort of like the punishment for the lowest performing kind of work group. And one of the guys is just kind of like giving signals across the kind of pathways, basically. Like they're pretty far away and they're giving like reports to each other from specific locations. They never really established what exactly was being done in those scenes. So I'm guessing something like that, where like it's clear that, oh, we can get the people over there to do something if we actually really want to, and they can organize some sort of an escape, I guess. Because initially I was thinking like, is like Vel going to have to like break Andor out? But it seems like there's gonna be at least another episode or two before other characters become aware that Cassian has actually been put in Imperial kind of this prison. So it doesn't feel like that's necessarily gonna be how they get out. But they seem to be building up to the idea that that is sort of the direction that we're kind of heading in eventually. They never fully clarified what they're building on the tables. There seem to just be some sort of thing where it's like this central structure, and then they have to just put these kind of like flexible kind of parts on all the way around the sides. And if they do it quick enough, you know, they get good food. If not, they get shocked and so on. And it's pretty brutal, the idea of like, obviously, as they later point out, the idea that, okay, you've got like your numbers here, and like if the punishments matched the crime, would it be like too bad? But then they point out the new thing that the Empire have just put into place, which is to like double the punishments for anyone like accused of things like this. The numbers just keep going up, and they're all at the point now where they basically are like, those numbers don't actually mean anything. So that's a bit of a problem. And I think for Andor, what he's realizing here is just that I was free. I had the money to basically do what I wanted, and I got for doing absolutely nothing. And my punishment is this thing that just seems excessive and terrifying to a certain degree. Like, he is stunned silent in so many scenes in this, because he just walks into a place and is just expected to immediately become part of the system, and it feels like there is no room to escape. That's why actually I'm interested in the upcoming episodes, I think much more than any other episode of Andor, because I am very intrigued to see what characters actually want to get involved in any sort of an escape attempt, and if there is any like outside help becoming involved on the inside here. let's see, the other aspects of this episode. Um, the Mon Mothma stuff here. There was a little bit of stuff going on. Tay had another scene, but then he kind of oddly like disappears a little bit at the end of the episode. I'm not sure if they're suggesting that that means anything. Things don't quite seem to be running super smoothly. They again are teasing more of the kind of fractured dynamics of the family. They do establish though that her marriage to her husband was an arranged marriage at like 15, and that she became a senator at 16. So that kind of explains why they don't seem to be like this amazing couple necessarily. They seem to be setting up something with the daughter. I'm not sure exactly what they were going for, but the thing that popped into my head was like, is the daughter beginning to be a little bit suspicious of her mother talking so much with this new old friend senator? So I wonder, will she accuse her mother of like having like an affair or something like that? Given that it's fairly clear from the dynamic between her two parents that their marriage doesn't seem like crazy close. So I'm wondering, will that come up at some point, or what? Because I know everyone has suspicions over like, oh, is the husband like a spy from the Imperials or not, and is maybe something going on with the daughter. So we're waiting for something to kind of like happen there. Otherwise, again, back to it being somewhat slow. There was a little bit of a conversation about just directly kind of like Star Wars politics, and Palpatine gets brought up, and there was a few people who are kind of like, he's not great, but you know, it is what it is type situation, and kind of just highlighting what she's dealing with in all of this. And all she can really do as a senator is, I think like she says, is trying to stop Palpatine trying to enforce like Imperial overreach in any way that she can, by getting enough votes to stop these new things coming into play. And I'm guessing it is stuff like we're seeing, like how it's just, it seems like it is just legal for Imperial controlled areas to just take anyone in, accuse them of anything, and now they're basically slave labor, like Andor is. So there's that. Vel and Cinta are on Ferrix, I believe that's the situation. So Cinta's back in play. They're interacting. And yeah, like we got from previous episodes, Cinta is the one who is the most heavily invested in the rebellion. Whereas Val seems more into their relationship, but Cinta's very much like, no, the rebellion comes first. And then there's the comment about like, Val is like a rich girl who's joined the rebellion, and so on. I think there's some suspicions about the idea is like, is she Luthen's daughter? I think a few people have kind of brought up that might help to explain a few things. The stuff on Ferrix though is kind of interesting in that, like, I get it, okay, like Deidre is now in charge and she meets Cyril in this episode. I think what ends up happening by the end of this is that there is that scene where they mention, I think Yularen mentions that, like, oh, you want all this like security, like equipment and stuff. It's very expensive. But I think what you're meant to take from that scene is that they're like, okay, this is a bit much, but we're roughly convinced. So the reason like Bix is captured and stuff like that, I think, is because it's that security equipment being utilized for the first time, and that's why the thing that was previously secret communications actually gets people captured this time. And so it highlights that Luthen's decision to agree with his like assistant, who I think at this point it seems like more or less the exact same level in the rebellion as Luthen, her proposition to like cut Ferrix off was actually correct, because if they didn't, he probably would have been tracked down. And the fact that they didn't answer back or say anything has probably saved them in this situation, because of course they're pretty much onto the idea that there is this important person they're calling Axis, we know as Luthen, and that's, what's going on here. I wonder, will they eventually get to the whole, like, is he Fulcrum type situation or something like that? But we are we're building to like a few of these plots. The Cyril Karn stuff I thought was interesting in that, okay, he like we suspect gets brought in by Deidre because he was there and she wants to know, is there anything the other guy who didn't report particularly well on things didn't put in his report? And the takeaway is ultimately that, like, okay, Cyril is more focused on these little things that she doesn't particularly care about that are technically new information, but it's not the information that she really, really wants. She just wants, like, can you tell me what this guy's name is? No, all you can tell me is that the cloak was green. And she doesn't really like that. He tries to basically, I suppose, propose the idea of, like, let me work for you, and, I'm really invested in this, but she just flat out says no. So I think that's where that plot ends in this episode, and so it feels like the really obvious thing that they were maybe going to go for here, they're not quite going for it. But it's clear he is a focused character, so I'm wondering, like, how we're gonna bring him back into play. In that, like, they know what Andor looks like, so it's not some sort of situation where, like, he's the only one who knows what Andor looks like to fit in that way. Otherwise, it seems like he's just back to doing his job, but now he's being basically told, you will be in trouble if you keep sending these, like, fake requests for data on Andor. I don't think he's going to stop looking, but he's going to have to stop looking in that exact way. Again, just what is the direction for that character, I'm not quite sure about at this point. But I think, now that they're connecting up a few of the plots, I think it's beginning to come together reasonably well. I didn't find myself caring too much about Bix and a lot of the other characters on Ferrix. They're teasing that Andor's mother is ill and that something bad is going to happen. Honestly, like, the second I saw her character and what she was kind of like, it feels like she's going to go down fighting the Empire in some way. So we'll see what she's able to, like, accomplish, because they covered the idea here of, like, she was trying to, like, open up, like, this hatch underneath one of the buildings to just give a secret pathway in for the rebels. So there's that. She did tell Andor in the previous episode, though, to stop searching for his sister because there were no survivors. Now, I definitely interpret that scene as he will still search. That is just her, who cares about Andor, trying to sort of, like, spare his feelings. So, like, don't spend your life searching for something that may not actually happen. So I don't know, unless there is a reveal that she for sure knows Andor's sister is dead, I feel that plot point is still active and relevant. We'll see where they go with that. The Saw Gerrera scene was interesting because it was the scene where it finally made it sort of clear, okay, this seems to be, on a broader picture, what this show is sort of trying to do. Luthen knows about most of the rebel cells, and he's trying to form it into something bigger, but he has to do it carefully because certain leaders of certain cells are not the right people to interact with the other people. And I think that's why Luthen doesn't tell Saw that I was responsible, I organized what happened to the garrison. And he's acting like, no, you were the one who did it, weren't you? He wants to instead have Saw work with this other guy who seems to be along the same kind of lines of Saw, as, like, maybe these are the more kind of, like, violent rebels, the more kind of, like, wild cells out there. And he's kind of like, okay, we'll put them together as just the ones who will just cause chaos somewhere. but we don't want them interacting with our more like spy intelligence rebel cells, who like I trust a little bit more to do more kind of cautious missions. Otherwise it's just going to be a mess. Kind of highlighting like this is the whole point here, is that we have the Empire, which is all like the exact same thing. Once you're part of the Empire, you are part of that system, and it's just all the same. The rebels have the benefit of the sort of like uniqueness, and they'll take who they can, but they also have to be cautious because of that. And, you know, Saw interacting with the wrong group could pull them down rather than like bigging them up. And I think that's the kind of point here of like, Saw mentions that, like, you know, I'm not the crazy one, it's all these other different groups that are like the crazy ones, I'm the reasonable one. And Luthen, I think at some point makes the point of like, you know, you need to stop arguing with people who agree with you, and basically point out, you know, that you're an anarchist basically, and that's why I suppose you're not getting as much out of this as you probably could be. I'm interested to see, like, come the end of Andor, season 1, season 2, whichever it is, what they exactly like do with that to make it kind of more of a proper, like, the rebel is the rebellion is now the Rebel Alliance, and when that properly like comes into play, and so on, because there's a few things that obviously need to happen. I think I'm getting to the point now where with a few of these scenes I probably do need to watch Rogue One again to get some of that stuff back into my head. But, you know, in general, like, this is, I think, doing a pretty good job at you know, building up some plot points that are quite good. Like I said, I think the main thing that I'm latching onto at this point is I like the prison break potential plot, just because it doesn't seem immediately obvious how, when, how, why, you know, it's going to happen. In a lot of other kind of Star Wars, especially, like when they go for a prison break, it's sort of maybe clear how it's going to happen. It doesn't feel that way here, so that's what interests me going forward. It seems very difficult to get out of here. And that's where I'm wondering, like, in the next episode, are they going to have certain characters find out Andor's in prison here? Find out that, what's his name? Keith, I forget the name he's going by at the moment. That this guy is Andor, and assist him with getting out in some way. We'll see. But yeah, I think that's all I want to say about Andor episodes 7 and 8. In general, I continue to like the show. Not as much as I think a lot of people are liking it, but I definitely do appreciate it. The best way I'd sum it up is that I think it is a show with this sort of 9 out of 10 sort of production quality, effort put into making it, but it's that effort, quality of writing, for a plot that is like a 6/7 out of 10 in terms of like interesting, important Star Wars storytelling, in terms of characters being used, what the actual plot is. And again, I feel this style of production, approach, writing can be used to tell better stories, and that will overall make for a better series. And I haven't been particularly liking how a lot of Andor discussion I felt has hinged upon putting down the other Star Wars live action shows just to big this one up. In that Obi-Wan Kenobi is a good show. Mandalorian is a good show. I enjoyed Book of Boba Fett. And yes, there are aspects of Andor that are better. But to, I think, say it's across the board better isn't great. I think there's been a lot of people being, I think, needlessly defensive about, I think, just the problem of like, is enough of the Star Wars fandom invested in what Andor is actually about. I think a lot of people like the approach, but if it was telling a more interesting story, you'd see the numbers, I think, match up to that a little bit better. And that's what I'm still, so far, kind of dealing with here. And I think that's the kind of point here. I didn't, when I did my Tales of the Jedi review earlier on, say that this is better than Andor, because I'm aware Tales of the Jedi is a very, very different thing in terms of format. Yes, I think the comparison to be made here is I do find the eras and some of the plot that they focused on in Tales of the Jedi to be much more interesting than the build-up of the rebellion plot that we're dealing with here. But it also had its own problems because it was sort of fast-paced, much shorter episodes and stuff like that. And again, there's a balance between these two styles of Star Wars, and I think a few too many people have attached themselves to, like, we need to do everything in the exact same way as Andor, when I'm like, no. Some aspects of Andor we should take and utilize in other shows, such as if we could have the same sort of kind of budget, like use of sets, and not rely as much on the sort of volume, utilize it in spots. But this show has good sets, make some good sets for other shows as well. And I think there just needs to be that sense of you don't only need to have the high production value on this show, and it's not just because it's Andor and it's all this sort of stuff. It's no, you just chose to make this the really high quality show for some reason. So there are my thoughts on these two episodes of Andor. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.